The meeting was almost over. A man in a tailored suit, the kind of dark gray that costs more than a car payment, stood at the head of a long, polished table. His name was Collier. He was an attorney for the development group. He pointed a silver pen at a large map spread under the fluorescent lights of the county planning office. The map showed the future. It showed 250 homes where there were now only fields of dry grass and oak trees. It showed cul-de-sacs and a small park with a man-made pond. And it showed a thick red line, the main artery for water and sewer, cutting straight across the landscape. Collier smiled a confident, closing smile. He had given this presentation a dozen times to a dozen different boards. It was a formality. And so, with the final utility easement for parcel 117G secured, the Oak Ridge Estates project can proceed on schedule. We appreciate the county's cooperation. He looked around the room at the tired faces of the planning commissioners, at the eager young associates from his firm, at the other local landowners who had already signed their papers and taken their checks. It was a done deal. The room was quiet, ready for the gavel, ready for lunch. From the back of the room, a voice. It was not loud. It was calm. That line is incorrect. Every head turned. The rhythmic tap of Collier's pen on the table stopped. He squinted toward the back, where a man sat alone on a simple wooden chair against the wall. The man had not spoken for the entire 2-hour meeting. He wore work boots, clean but scuffed at the toes. His hands, resting on his knees, were weathered. A faded plaid shirt was tucked neatly into his jeans. He looked like he should be fixing a fence, not sitting in a planning commission meeting. Collier's professional smile returned, this time with a thin layer of condescension.
I'm sorry.
He checked his notes. You are Mr. Vance? Arthur Vance? Owner of the parcel in question 73B? The man nodded once. Arthur Vance. The parcel is 73B, and the line you have drawn across it is incorrect. Collier let out a short, controlled sigh, the sound of a patient man dealing with a minor, unforeseen annoyance. Mr. Vance, he said, his tone softening as if speaking to a child, that red line represents a prescriptive public utility easement recorded by this county in 1978. It has been on the books, undisputed, for over 40 years. It is a matter of public record. Our surveyors confirmed the boundaries. Our title search was exhaustive. The line is correct. Arthur Vance said nothing for a long moment. He just looked at the expensive map, at the confident red line that cut his small piece of land in half. He did not look at Collier. He did not look at the commissioners. His gaze was fixed on the paper representation of a place he knew better than anyone else in the room. Finally, he spoke again, his voice just as quiet, just as steady. The public record is wrong. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the sleepy silence of a meeting winding down. It was sharp, attentive. The commissioners sat up a little straighter. The young associates from the law firm exchanged glances. A phone was set down on the table with a soft click. In that room, a place built on the certainty of recorded filings and legal precedent, the statement was a kind of heresy. Collier's smile was gone now, replaced by a tight, professional mask of impatience. He was a man who operated on billable hours, and this was rapidly becoming a waste of his time. Mr. Vance, on what grounds do you make such an extraordinary claim? Are you a surveyor? No. A lawyer? Arthur Vance shook his head. No. Then what is your basis for telling this commission, and my client, that 40 years of established legal documentation is, in your words, wrong? Collier left the question hanging in the air, confident of its power. He had built his career on such questions, questions that boxed in opposition, that exposed the amateur for what he was. He expected a fumbling response, a vague reference to an old memory, a misunderstanding of the law. He was prepared to dismantle it gently but firmly, to thank Mr. Vance for his time, and to get the final stamp of approval. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and stood even taller, a physical assertion of his position. He was the expert. He was the institution. Arthur Vance, the man in the work boots, remained seated. He did not seem intimidated. He did not seem angry. He simply seemed to be waiting. The room watched him, this quiet man who had become the unexpected center of everything. He reached into the inside pocket of his worn coat. He did not pull out a weapon. He did not pull out a wallet. He pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. It was old. Its creases were soft, almost like fabric. He did not unfold it. He just held it in his hand. My basis, he said, looking at Collier directly for the first time, is the deed. Not the one from 1978. The one from 1891. To understand the paper in his hand, you have to go back. Not just to 1891, but to a Dusty County auction 22 years before this meeting. It was a hot day in August. Arthur Vance was younger then, but he had the same quiet stillness about him. He stood at the back of the crowd while the auctioneer rattled off parcel numbers and tax liens. Most of the properties were unremarkable. A few acres here, a foreclosed lot there. Then the auctioneer called out parcel 73B, a forgotten piece of land. 5 acres, landlocked, no road access, and bisected by a county utility easement. The auctioneer almost laughed as he said it. Basically a 5-acre ditch, folks. The county values it at $2,000, but will start the bidding for the back taxes. For $100. Do I hear 400? The crowd was silent. A few men chuckled. Who would buy a useless strip of land you couldn't even get to? For $100, the auctioneer repeated. Going once. Going twice. From the back, a single hand went up. It was Arthur. The auctioneer squinted. Sold, he said, sounding surprised, for $412 to the gentleman in the back. Some men in the crowd shook their heads. There was a fool born every minute. Arthur paid the clerk in cash. He took the tax deed, a simple, modern document, and folded it into his pocket. He didn't speak to anyone. He just walked out to his truck and drove away. For weeks, the land sat untouched. Then, one Saturday in October, he drove his old Ford as close as he could get and walked the rest of the way in. The property was overgrown with thorny bushes and tall, weedy grass. It was exactly as useless as everyone had said. But Arthur hadn't bought it for what it was. He had bought it for what it had been. He spent the entire day with a brush axe, clearing a narrow path. He wasn't clearing it to build anything. He was looking for something. Late in the afternoon, his axe struck something hard. Not a rock. It was a clean, sharp sound. He got down on his knees and pulled away the tangled vines. Underneath was a circle of flat, gray stones, fitted together with a skill that was a century old. It was the cap of a well. This was what he had been looking for. The next weekend, he didn't bring an axe. He went to the county courthouse. He didn't go to the bright, modern records office on the main floor. He went down to the basement, to the archive. An old clerk with thick glasses looked up from a large, dusty book. "Can I help you?" Arthur nodded. "I'd like to see the original plat maps for the North River Territory. From before 1900. The clerk sighed. "Those are fragile. What are you looking for?" "Parcel 73B. The clerk led him to a shelf of enormous, leather-bound volumes. He pulled one down. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the lines were clear. There, on a hand-drawn map from 1891, was his parcel. It wasn't 73B then. It was just the Haverford tract, and drawn right in the middle of it was a small circle, labeled simply, well, but Arthur kept looking. He spent the next 3 Saturdays in that basement. He wasn't looking at maps anymore. He was looking at deeds, transfer records. He was tracing the land back, owner by owner, from his tax deed to the original homesteader. He found him, a man named Jedediah Morse, and he found the original deed, filed in October of 1891. The language was ornate, the handwriting a looping cursive. And in the middle of the legal description, written in the same steady hand, was a covenant. A single sentence that had been overlooked, forgotten, and papered over for more than 100 years. It was a promise concerning the well, promise made to last forever. His father had been a well digger, not with modern machinery, but the old way, with shovels and stone and a deep understanding of the earth. He was a quiet man, much like Arthur. He believed that water was a sacred trust. A man's word about water, his father used to say, was the truest measure of his character. He taught Arthur how to read the land, how to find the hidden seams of life beneath the dry soil. But he also taught him how to read paper. He would spread old deeds on the kitchen table, deeds from his grandfather and great-grandfather. "See this line, son?" he'd say, his calloused finger tracing a boundary. "That's not just ink. That's a man's promise. Promise to his neighbor. Promise to the future. You respect the lines. You never bend them." Arthur's father had lost his own small farm when Arthur was just a boy. It wasn't a bank that took it. It was a legal fight over a creek. A new neighbor, a wealthy man from the city, had hired a clever lawyer. The lawyer found a loophole, a misplaced comma in a deed from 50 years prior. He used it to divert the creek, drying up his father's best pasture. His father fought it. He went to court with his simple, honest understanding of the agreement. The lawyer came with stacks of books and convoluted arguments. The judge sided with the lawyer. They lost the farm a year later. His father never recovered from it. It wasn't the loss of the land that broke him. It was the loss of the principle. The idea that a promise on paper could be twisted, that the lines could be bent by someone with more money and fewer scruples. On his deathbed, his father had held Arthur's hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. "Don't let them bend the lines, son. Always keep them straight." That memory had stayed with Arthur. It became a quiet rule he lived by. So when he started looking at old tax auction notices, he wasn't just looking for cheap land. He was looking for a story. He was looking for a line that had been forgotten, a promise that had been ignored. He studied the old maps for months before the auction. He saw the notation for the easement from 1978. Then he cross-referenced it with the older maps in the library's historical collection. He saw the well on the 1891 map. He saw the discrepancy. He suspected that the county in 1978, in its hurry to establish utility corridors for a modernizing world, had simply drawn a line on a map. They had run a title search, but they had likely only gone back 50 years. They had never looked in the dusty books in the basement. They had never seen the original promise tied to the Haverford tract and its well. So when Arthur raised his hand at that auction, he wasn't buying a useless ditch. He was buying a question. He was buying a chance to straighten a line that had been bent for 40 years. He was buying it for his father. Back in the planning office, the air was thick with tension. Collier, the attorney, stared at the folded paper in Arthur Vance's hand. He forced a small, dismissive laugh. "Mr. Vance, I admire your historical interest, but this is not a history seminar. It is a legal proceeding. A document from the 19th century, whatever it says, does not supersede a properly recorded prescriptive easement established through decades of public access and necessity. That is a foundational principle of property law." He looked at the commissioners, seeking their affirmation. They nodded slowly. He was speaking their language. He was citing precedent. Arthur did not seem fazed. He finally unfolded the paper. It was not the original deed. It was a certified copy he had paid the county clerk to make years ago. The paper was heavy, the copy sharp and clear. He placed it on the table in front of him. He didn't push it toward anyone. He just laid it there. A prescriptive easement cannot be established on a right that was never available to be claimed in the first place, he said. His words were precise. He had practiced them in his mind for years. The original grant deed for this parcel, recorded in 1891, contains a superior covenant. A covenant that runs with the land in perpetuity. It was created before this county's modern charter was even drafted. It stands above any subsequent claim. Collier's smile was gone completely. He walked over and looked down at the document, refusing to pick it up. He read the looping script. His eyes narrowed. He saw the sentence. His legal mind immediately shifted to his second line of attack, the practical argument. He straightened up and looked at Arthur, his tone now one of sincere, man-to-man reason. "All right, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that this antiquated clause has some technical merit. Mr. Vance, you have to understand the larger picture. This is a $300 million development. It will create hundreds of jobs. It will provide beautiful homes for families. It will increase the county's tax base. All of that is being held up by a dispute over a 5-acre strip of inaccessible brush. Surely you and I can come to an agreement. My client is authorized to be very generous. We will compensate you handsomely for this oversight. Let's not let a piece of paper from 100 years ago stand in the way of progress. Arthur looked at the expensive map at the red line. Then he looked back at Collier. It is not an oversight, he said. It is the title. Collier's patience was visibly fraying. He had tried law. He had tried money. Now he would try his third and final argument. Ridicule. An appeal to the room's sense of shared modernity. He gestured at the old document with a wave of his hand. Ladies and gentlemen of the commission, what we have here is an absurdity. We are sitting in a modern office, planning a modern community, and we are being asked to halt everything because of a sentence written with a quill pen when there were still horses tied up outside this courthouse. The world moves on. The law adapts. Common sense must prevail. To allow this project to be derailed by such a flimsy, historical technicality would be a failure of our duty to the people of this county. He looked at Arthur one last time. Mr. Vance, this is over. Arthur Vance did not respond. He didn't need to. He had presented his fact. The fact did not require a defense. It only required verification. He let the silence stretch. He let Collier's words hang in the air, full of their own self-importance. The other landowners in the room, the ones who had already sold their easements, were now watching intently. They had seen Arthur as a fool, an obstacle. Now they weren't so sure. They saw the confidence draining from the expensive lawyer. They saw the unnerving calm of the man in the work boots. Something had shifted in the room. The weight of certainty had moved from one side of the table to the other. All eyes turned to the head of the commission, a woman named Eleanor Gavel. She was in her late 60s with gray hair tied in a neat bun. She had been the county planning director for 30 years. She had seen everything. She had said nothing through the entire exchange, her face a mask of neutral competence. She looked at Collier, then at Arthur. Then she looked at the certified copy of the old deed lying on the table. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice clear and decisive. What is the filing number on the original document? Arthur read it aloud from a small notebook he pulled from his shirt pocket. A string of numbers and letters. Mrs. Gavel turned to her own computer, an old beige terminal that connected to the deep archives in the basement. The same archives Arthur had spent his Saturdays in. The room was silent. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic clicking of the keyboard as her fingers moved with practiced efficiency. 1 minute passed. Then 2. The silence became heavy. Collier stood motionless, his arms crossed. He tried to project an air of detached confidence, but a small muscle twitched in his jaw. The printer next to Mrs. Gavel's desk whirred to life. A jarring, mechanical sound in the quiet room. Printed a single page. She tore it from the machine and read it to herself. Her expression did not change. She looked up, her gaze passing over Collier and landing on Arthur. She spoke not to Arthur, but to the entire room, a formal declaration of fact. The covenant recorded in 1891 on the Haverford Tract, now designated as Parcel 73B, grants exclusive and inalienable rights to the well water thereon to the owner of said parcel and his heirs and assigns forever, and prohibits any public or private encumbrance that may impede, interrupt, or endanger said access. She took a breath. Our legal counsel confirms that this covenant predates the county's 1952 charter and all subsequent zoning and easement ordinances. The prescriptive easement filed in 1978 was recorded in error. It is and has always been void. A collective, quiet intake of breath seemed to move through the room. The institutional certainty had shattered. The young associates from Collier's firm stared at their boss, waiting for a brilliant rebuttal that did not come. The commissioners looked at each other, then at Mrs. Gavel, whose face remained impassive. The truth, once verified, was simple. It was absolute. Collier stood frozen for a moment. The color had drained from his face. He was a man who had built a fortress of assumptions, and a quiet carpenter had just walked through the front gate with a key everyone else had forgotten existed. He recovered quickly, or at least he tried. He forced his professional mask back into place, the smile returning, though it was now brittle, strained. "Well," he said, his voice a little too loud, "it appears we have a fascinating and frankly unprecedented situation. A remarkable piece of historical sleuthing, Mr. Vance. Truly." He turned his body to face Arthur directly, adopting a new posture, one of co-conspirator, of a partner in finding a solution. "Clearly, there has been a significant oversight in the county records, and my client, Oak Ridge Estates, is prepared to rectify it. We are prepared to make a substantial offer to purchase your parcel outright. Given its newfound strategic importance, I am authorized to begin the bidding at $500,000. He said the number as if offering a gift. It was more than 1,000 times what Arthur had paid. A murmur went through the room. $500,000 for a useless patch of weeds. This quiet man had just won the lottery. Collier smiled, believing he had finally found the right language. The language of money. "This is a very fortunate day for you, Mr. Vance. We can have the paperwork drawn up this afternoon." Arthur looked at the man. He saw the desperation behind the smile. He saw the attempt to turn a matter of principle into a simple transaction. "The land is not for sale." The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a gavel. Collier's jaw went slack. I don't think you understand. I can likely get that number to $750,000, perhaps more. It's a piece of dirt with a hole in it. Let us make you a rich man." Arthur Vance shook his head slowly. "It's not your money to offer." He paused, letting the room listen. "That land has a well. The deed protects the water. You are not buying the land. You are trying to buy the water, and I am not selling the water, or the promise that protects it." He spoke the last words with a quiet finality that left no room for negotiation. He was not a seller. He was a custodian. The meeting was over. There was no formal adjournment. It just ended. The energy drained from the room, leaving behind the stale air of defeat. Collier did not try to argue further. The foundation of his case was gone, and the man he was facing was immovable. He slowly began to gather his things. He slid his presentation materials into a polished leather briefcase with a quiet snap of the clasps. He buttoned his suit jacket. It was a gesture of closing, of retreat. He did not look at Arthur. He spoke in low, urgent tones to his associates, and together they swept out of the room, a small, defeated army. The other landowners, the ones who had taken the quick money for their easements, filed out quietly. A few of them glanced at Arthur on their way out, their expressions a mixture of awe and resentment. The commissioners began to talk among themselves, their voices hushed, already grappling with the immense political and financial fallout of the developer's red line being erased from the map. Arthur Vance sat for a moment in the sudden quiet. He watched the room empty. He had not won a great victory. He had not vanquished an enemy. He had simply held up a fact until the world was forced to look at it. He had kept a line straight. He carefully, slowly rolled up his certified copy of the old map. The paper was fragile, and he handled it with a gentleness born of respect. He slid it back into the simple cardboard tube that had protected it for years. He took the copy of the deed, folded it along its old, soft creases, and placed it back in the inside pocket of his coat. Felt warm against his chest. He stood up. The worn wooden chair scraped softly against the linoleum floor. He walked toward the door, his work boots making a steady, unhurried sound. He had been the first to arrive and was now the last to leave, apart from Mrs. Gable, who was still sitting at her desk, organizing her papers. As he reached the door, she looked up. She did not smile, but her eyes held a look of profound, quiet respect. She gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. Arthur Vance nodded back. No words were exchanged. None were needed. He walked out into the hallway, its institutional quiet a stark contrast to the tension of the meeting room. He did not feel triumphant. He did not feel rich. He felt a simple, clean sense of rightness. The kind of feeling that comes from finishing a job properly, of making sure the joints are square and the foundation is level. The auction was over. The crooked line was gone. Done. That evening, The sun set in streaks of orange and purple across the fields. Arthur sat at his kitchen table. The cardboard tube lay in the center of the table like a silent testament. His wife, Mary, placed a cup of coffee in front of him. She had been married to him for 35 years. She knew the contours of his silence better than anyone. She had seen him go to the courthouse basement on all those Saturdays. She had seen him studying the old maps under the dim kitchen light. She had never asked what he was looking for. She knew he would find it when the time was right. She gestured toward the tube with her chin. "Was it done right?" she asked. Arthur took a slow sip of his coffee. He looked out the window at the fading light. He nodded. Straight now. He didn't need to explain the money he had turned down. He didn't need to describe the look on the lawyer's face. Mary understood. It was never about the money. It was about his father. It was about the quiet rule of keeping the line straight. Some men collect problems. He collected patience. Later, as dusk settled into a deep blue, he walked out of the house and across his main property. He came to the fence line that bordered parcel 73B. He crossed it and walked the path he had cleared more than 2 decades before. The path was faint now, but he knew the way by heart. He came to the circle of stones in the small clearing. The old well. He knelt down and looked into the dark opening. He could not see the bottom, but he could smell the cool, damp air rising from it. The water was still there, deep and clean and untouched. He had never drawn a single bucket from it. He never would. The promise wasn't for him. He had simply been its keeper. Some things are planted for the next man. He stood up, the evening quiet all around him. He had restored a small piece of the world to its proper shape. And that was enough. A story about a piece of paper can reroute the future of a town. But sometimes the truth isn't written on paper. Sometimes it's forged in steel. In Ohio, a young woman, a librarian, inherits a safe deposit box from a grandmother she never knew. The bank manager opens it for her and declares it empty. But the librarian notices something else. Not inside the box, but on the box itself. A second keyhole, one the bank has no record of and no key for. Stay with us. We'll see what it unlocks.